of my colleagues to support this important legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves his time. Gentleman from California, Mr. Royce.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to yield 6 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. Let me rephrase that, Mr. Speaker. I will yield to him such time as he may consume.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for as much time as he wishes to consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Royce, for your total support for this legislation, the initiative behind it. You have been a great friend of all of the left-behind parents and abducted children. I want to thank you very sincerely, and also thank Eliot Engel, our ranking member. You know, at a time when there are very few bipartisan initiatives, you, as leader of our committee, have ensured that the committee is a bipartisan committee where we work for the good of the people and really we work on a global basis for all people, human rights, humanitarian issues. So I want to thank you for that. It really has made a difference, and thank you for your support in getting this legislation here today. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Speaker, David Goldman spent over 5 agonizing years trying to legally rescue his son, Sean, from an abduction to Brazil, which is a signatory nation like the United States to the Hague Abduction Convention. Despite Mr. Goldman's airtight case that demonstrated an egregious example of both child abduction and wrongful retention, the Hague Treaty was unavailing, and the outcomes in the Brazilian courts largely proved infuriating, infirm, and ineffective. David Goldman had extraordinary legal counsel both in Brazil and in the United States. Patricia Appy, his American attorney, is a world-class expert in child abduction cases. He waged his case by the book and won judgments in the New Jersey courts, yet both Sean and David were made to suffer emotional pain for over half a decade as one delaying ploy after another was employed by the abducting parties. In the end, Mr. Speaker, because of the father's abiding love for his son and an indomitable will, the Goldmans today are united and happy. But the Goldmans are an exception in an ever-worsening injustice that harms thousands of American children and many more kids worldwide. Most cases of parental abduction and wrongful retention have a bad ending. The child or children never return, and the left-behind parents often never sees them again. Even if left-behind parents are allowed access, the conditions are tightly supervised and of an excruciatingly short duration. Over the years, I've had the privilege of meeting many absolutely amazing, dedicated, yet heartbroken left-behind parents. Some of them are here today in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, up in the gallery, as they wage an effort on behalf of their abducted children. Out of deep love and a commitment to justice, they too, like David Goldman, adamantly refuse to quit. Tragically, Mr. Speaker, their stories are often eerily the same. In the beginning days and weeks post-abduction, they thought the Hague Treaty, their government, and the rule of law would ensure a swift, just, and durable remedy. As the months, then years go by, however, the journey of the left-behind parent is filled with unbearable pain. The heartache they endure is severely compounded by the fact that child abductions and wrongful retentions significantly harm children. It hurts children in many ways, especially psychologically. Mr. Speaker, more than 1,000 international child abductions are reported to the State Department's Office on Children's Issues, also known as the Central Authority of the United States, each and every year. And that's just those that are reported. There are many that are not. Between 2008 and 2012, some 7,000 American children were abducted, according to the Department of State. According to the State Department as well, about half of those children abducted from the U.S. to countries with which this country has reciprocal obligations under the Hague Convention, about half of those are ever returned. In other words, the other half are not. And where there is no treaty obligation, less than 40% of abduction and access cases are resolved. It's an awful record that Congress today can help change. The purpose of H.R. 3212 as amended, the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction and Prevention Act of 2013, is to protect children from the harmful effects of child abduction and wrongful retention, and to assist left-behind parents not only to have access to their children, but significantly to enhance the prospects of resolution. My biggest policy takeaway from working on the Goldman case, Mr. Speaker, was the absence of incentives for nations to prioritize resolving parental abduction cases and the complete lack of penalty for callous governmental indifference as well as complicity. The Goldman Act is based on two human rights laws, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVVA, which I authored in the year 2000, and the International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA, which was authored by our distinguished colleague Frank Wolf. The Goldman legislation seeks to hold countries to account by meticulously monitoring their performance in adjudicating parental child abduction and wrongful retention. After a vigorous analysis, if a country at its administrative, judicial, or law enforcement levels demonstrates what we call a pattern of non-cooperation, that is to say, persistent failure to fulfill its Hague Abduction Convention responsibilities, or failure of a non-Hague nation to abide by a memorandum of understanding with the United States, the President is empowered to take any number of escalating presidential actions against that nation. Again, patterned after both the TPVA and IRFA, the message to all nations and all past, present, and future abductors is that the United States is very serious about preventing or resolving child abduction cases. In order to ensure that the administration has maximum flexibility in advancing solutions, the President is given generous waiver authorities. The bill also encourages the Secretary of State to seek opportunities to enter into an MOU with a non-Hague Convention country, and obviously those that are not non-Hague could also become a part of it even when they do become one, and to establish protocols to identify, locate, and effectuate the return of an abducted child, as well as access issues. Finally, in order to ensure more robust accountability and the potential of a successful intervention, the bill significantly beefs up reporting. Finally, let me just say also, Mr. Speaker, the bill has been endorsed by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I will include in the record a letter from that very august organization in support. And the VFW, in a letter from Robert Wallace, the Executive Director of the VFW, has also endorsed the bill and has made it very clear their concern, which is reflected in the text of the bill, about our service members deployed abroad who find themselves in the unbelievably horrific position of having a child abducted while they are deployed, and then not only not having access to, but certainly not getting their child back. And there are a number of cases I've had at my hearings, we've had 4 so far, who have testified about during their deployment, in the case of Commander Tolan, who was stationed in Japan, his daughter was abducted by his now deceased wife, and he has not had access to his daughter in a decade, Mr. Speaker, a decade. She's now 11, and he has desperately, through the rule of law and by using the process, tried to have access to and to reclaim as the only surviving parent his precious daughter. And he is like so many others. Michael Elias, a combat-injured Iraqi war veteran, in like manner, both of his children were abducted, and he cannot even have access to them. I actually traveled to Japan, Mr. Speaker, and with the grandparents, we could not even get to see those 2 wonderful children. That has got to change. This legislation seeks to use the civil aspects of the Hague Convention to empower that treaty, which is very well intentioned but lacks enforcement capability. This legislation gives the President the tools, adds to those tools in the toolbox to really make return and access a reality rather than a dream and a hope. I yield back to my distinguished chairman the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to my friend and colleague on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for your important work and leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3212, and I want to thank and recognize my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Chairman of the subcommittee, Chris Smith, and Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Royce, for their important leadership and hard work on this bill. Mr. Speaker, as a co-sponsor of this bill, I speak on behalf of all left-behind parents, and in particular, on behalf of a constituent of mine from Newton, Massachusetts, Colin Bauer. Colin was granted full custody of his children, Noor and Ramsey, in 2008. In 2009, the boy's mother unexpectedly took them out of school, boarded a plane, fled to Egypt, and has never since returned. And through all that time, she has refused to return the children. It has been nearly 2 years since Colin has spoken with his sons and seen his sons. Despite the custody ruling of a U.S. court and subsequent Egyptian court order granting him the right to visit with his children, Colin has been denied the opportunity to see his children time and time again. I just got off the phone with Colin a few moments ago. He recapped the details of his ordeal, yet again to me. But I guess, in the words that he said most poignantly, no parent should ever have to go through this. Between the years of 2008 and 2012, Mr. Speaker, parents reported more than 4,800 cases of abduction involving more than 7,000 children, according to the State Department. Currently, 89 countries are party to a Hague Treaty that provides a legal framework for children who are victims of international abduction. This bill would require the Secretary of State to enter into a memorandum of understanding with those countries that have not signed the Hague Agreement, creating a mechanism where none exists, to try to bring children home safely. Additionally, it will provide better reporting to parents and to Congress. No parent should have to suffer the unbelievable heartbreak that Colin has experienced over the past 5 years. No child should be torn away from a safe home and loving family because their country didn't have the protections in place to protect them. We can do more to ensure that these children find a way home. And I ask my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time to my colleague from Illinois.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back his time. The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. ROS-LEHTINEN, Chairman Emeritus of the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for the time, and I rise in strong support of the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act, authored by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Chris Smith of New Jersey. Mr. Smith has been a stalwart supporter of the rights of children and for the left-behind parents who all too often feel as though they have been abandoned by their government and have no place to turn to. According to our State Department, hundreds of parental transnational child abduction cases occur each year. Hundreds. In most of the cases, the left-behind parents here in the United States face a tremendous uphill battle with the foreign country's government to return their child. And to make matters worse, they have no recourse, no legal basis to turn to that would compel that foreign government to cooperate with them and return their abducted child to the United States. The effects that this has on both the child and the parents are significant and in many cases have unshakable, lifelong consequences. This bill, Mr. Smith's bill, gives hope where there previously was none. It represents a new approach to resolving this issue by giving our government and the President the avenues needed to press the countries that are found to be habitually non-cooperative and non-compliant to work with the United States in order to resolve these cases. For some countries that refuse to cooperate, it is clear that words are not enough. They must be convinced by action to do the right thing, and this bill sends that very message that the United States will not rest until we bring every wrongfully abducted American child home. Too many parents have been separated from their children for far too long with little to no recourse, and we must change that now, Mr. Speaker. I would like to urge that we not also overlook that in many instances a parent will flee with their child or children internationally in order to escape domestic violence. Too often, current U.S. law addressing international child abduction actually, if I could have 15 seconds.
I ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady have 30 additional seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Too often, current U.S. law addressing child abduction actually facilitates domestic violence and child abuse by forcing the return of a child despite a recognized risk to the child or parent. It is my sincere hope that with Mr. Smith's bill and my bill, the further corrective measures to international child abduction laws that I plan to soon introduce can help strengthen this measure, and we will be able to resolve these issues so that the interest of all involved can be addressed and the children's rights can be respected. I thank the chairman, I thank the speaker, I thank the sponsor.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
I reserve.
Continues to reserve.
I'll yield.
I'll reserve the right to close then, Mr. Speaker.
Did the gentleman from Illinois yield back?
Seeing that I have no further speakers, I yield the balance of my time.
He yields back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and in closing, let me note again that the tragedy of international abduction affects thousands of children every year here in the United States. When the Committee on Foreign Affairs considered this bill back on October 10th, we heard from multiple members whose constituents are dealing with the nightmare of being illegally separated from their children. Our Human Rights Subcommittee heard directly from several left-behind American parents at a May 9th hearing. H.R. 3212 by Mr. Smith is a measured response to this pressing problem, and I want to again thank the gentleman from New Jersey for the vision, the perseverance, frankly, reflected in his bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3212 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
California requests the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise, remain standing till counted. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1992, the Israel Qualitative Military Edge, or QME Enhancement Act, as amended.
The clerk report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1992, a bill to amend the requirements relating to assessment of Israel's qualitative military edge over military threats and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from California is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
Thank you. And let me begin by thanking both the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for their leadership, for their foresight in authoring this very important measure. In shepherding this legislation through the committee, I was again reminded of the shared commitment of members of both parties to come together to promote Israel's security. It is an example of bipartisanship at the best, and the United States' commitment to Israel rests on the assurance that the U.S., through a combination of foreign military financing, joint cooperative development of weapons systems, and other measures, will ensure that Israel upholds its qualitative military edge. The standard definition of that is ensuring Israel's ability to counter and defeat credible military threats from any individual state or coalition of states or non-state actors. And with the growing threat to Israel throughout the region, from the prospect of a nuclear Iran to an ascendant Hezbollah and widespread regional instability, Israel's retention of its QME is critical to its existence. I had a chance to see this firsthand in 2006 during the Second Lebanon War, which I frankly think should be called the Hezbollah War. Hezbollah was raining down rockets manufactured originally in Iran and Syria on a daily basis on Haifa. And when I was in Haifa, I watched those rockets come in, and they were being aimed at civilian neighborhoods. They were also being aimed at the hospital there. In one trip I took down to the hospital to see the results. And Haifa is a very cosmopolitan city. 1/3 of Haifa is Israeli Jews. Another third are Arab Israelis. Another third are Druze and other minorities. And the people in that city faced a constant bombardment for 30 days. And while we were there, we had an opportunity to talk to some of the families, some of the survivors. 600 victims, civilian victims, of those attacks in that trauma hospital. And they showed us how when those missiles manufactured in Iran, and this was before the invention of the Iron Dome, so there was no defense to this. They would come into the civilian neighborhoods, 90,000 ball bearings, and they would just go through the walls, through cars, through a shop. This is what led basically to a siege-like setting in which families were underground. But as they would try to come up at some point, they'd be spotted from the other side, from the border. And once again, Hezbollah would try to hit that family, hit that township. This was what Haifa was going through. It is a reminder of the threat that Israel needs the best technology to combat these and other terrorist attacks. It is a relief that now Israel does have the Iron Dome. There is warning. There is the ability of some type of response other than the type of counter-battery work that we saw as they were trying to silence those rockets, which were never silenced, which came in for 30 days. In 2008, Congress required the President to assess on an ongoing basis the extent to which Israel possesses a qualitative military edge over the threats that are arrayed against it. Those threats are all too real. Currently, the assessment is done every 4 years. Currently, it focuses only on the conventional military threats to Israel. But this bill would require that Congress receive that assessment on a timely basis, at least every 2 years, and would also require the administration to specify a separate one-time report integrating cyber and asymmetric threats to Israel into this overall security assistance framework. And this is very important given the new types of terror, suicide bombing and the rest of it, and cyber warfare that is being developed on either side of the border, from Hamas to Hezbollah. These provisions will provide Congress critical information that it requires in a timeless manner to assess Israel's security requirements as Israel tries to deal with everything from the threat in Iran to all of the other terrorist organizations that are proxies for Iran. It also sends the right message at the right time to our mutual friends and foes alike that the United States and Israel stands together. So I strongly support the immediate passage. I thank again Mr. Schneider and Mr. Collins for their good work, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves his time. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 1992, the Israel Qualitative Military Edge Enhancement Act, and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he wishes to use.
I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for working so diligently with my office and Congressman Doug Collins to bring this important legislation before the House floor. I want to personally thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Collins, for all the work he has done and we have done together to make sure this bill becomes a reality. Israel stands at a historic juncture. In a very dangerous neighborhood, Israel must have the capabilities to deal with a broad spectrum of potential conventional and asymmetric threats. With the United States negotiating with Iran over its nuclear weapons program, it is vitally important that we continue to give Israel the tools necessary, all of the tools necessary, to address a growing list of threats. That is why Representative Collins and I have introduced this important and timely bill to help further safeguard the technological edge Israel has in defending herself and safeguarding human life for all of her citizens. This bill expands upon existing requirements that the United States aid Israel in developing defense-capable systems for safeguarding the Israeli homeland against conventional and asymmetrical threats. Previously, this cooperation has resulted in the highly successful Iron Dome system, along with continued development of the Arrow and David Sling series of military hardware. Despite this capability, Israel now faces the threat of regional insecurity with a virtual failed state on its border with Syria. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of rockets and mortars being stockpiled by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Ongoing rocket fire from Hamas in the Gaza Strip, increasing terrorist activity in the Sinai, and most importantly, the continued existential threat of Iran and its accelerating nuclear program. The U.S. can and must do more to aid Israel in addressing all of these threats in a comprehensive way. The bill before us would specifically encourage greater cooperation between Israel and the United States in developing new weapons, tactics, and procedures that will safeguard them from the growing threats of cyber warfare and asymmetrical military threats such as terrorist activity. Increased reporting and coordination will allow the United States and Israel to continue their mutually beneficial research and intelligence programs to create a more secure and prosperous region, and one that can safeguard human life to the maximum extent possible. By increasing the frequency of assessment from 4 years to 2, the Israel Qualitative Military Edge Enhancement Act will help ensure Israel is always prepared to confront constantly evolving conventional and asymmetrical threats. I again want to thank the Chair and Ranking Member for their support of this legislation. I also want to thank the other co-sponsors of this bill, including Representative Collins, for his hard work to hone this bill over the last few months. I would especially like to thank Vernon Robinson, Jr., who worked so diligently with my staff to shepherd this bill to the House floor today. I ask my colleagues to strongly join me in support of this important bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're going to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the author of this bill, and we want to thank him for being such an active member of our committee.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate what your staff and others have done, the ranking member, in moving this legislation through, and also my good friend from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, and what we've been able to work together. And I would be remiss also if I did not recognize Vernon Robinson from my staff as well, who is with me today, who has kept this going while we have worked as well, and so I appreciate his work and the rest of our staffs in doing so. I introduced H.R. 1992, the Israel QME Enhancement Act, to ensure our commitment to Israel's qualitative military edge remains substantial and meaningful. This legislation allows Congress to conduct oversight of weapons sales in the Middle East with increased frequency. Due to the instability in the region, it is vitally important that the qualitative military edge review process be updated to reflect the needs of Israel. H.R. 1992 accomplishes this goal by directing the President to report to Congress every 2 years regarding the assessment of Israel's qualitative military edge over military threats to Israel and related weapon sales in the Middle East. This is a marked improvement over our current law, which only requires such a report to be issued every 4 years. H.R. 1992 also requires the President to issue a report to Congress on the criteria issued to include cyber and asymmetric threats in the QME report. Large conventional armies are less likely to mobilize against Israel, but terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah and Hamas are a constant threat. And I'm very concerned by the cyber attacks that have been launched against Israel, as well as the continued onslaught of terrorist attacks that threaten the security and stability of this peace-loving nation. The QME doctrine originated during the Johnson administration but came into practice during the Yom Kippur War in 1973, when the United States conducted one of the largest military airlifts in history to resupply Israel with military hardware. Since Israel's victory in the conflict, the United States has sworn to ensure Israel's qualitative military edge remains strong, as surrounding Middle Eastern countries often possess a quantitative advantage. The benefits of the Israeli-American relationship are undeniable. Our alliance has been vital for each nation's intelligence efforts, and both nations have provided valuable information that has saved the lives of civilians as well as military personnel. I've recognized the value of America's partnership for many years, and I'm humbled and grateful to now be in a position where I can support this alliance on the floor of the House. America's support for Israel should be strong and responsive to the changing threats facing our ally. Their military strength is a vital component of promoting stability and peace in the Middle East. I am pleased by the steadfast commitment of this body and our leadership have shown in maintaining a vibrant partnership with Israel. As the Vice Chair of Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Middle East and North Africa, I am committed to promoting policy decisions that ensure Israel be equipped to maintain the only stable democracy in the Middle East. In recent weeks, there have been rounds of negotiations concerning Iran's nuclear capabilities. As a result of these negotiations, an agreement was reached with Iran, and the details of which put Israel in a very difficult position. Many questions remain about Iran's continued ability to enrich uranium and the billions of dollars they will gain in sanctions relief. Questions such as where will these be used and how will the money that they use be used for other attacks such as Hezbollah or others in this area. One thing I am certain, however, the savings will not be spent on any effort advantageous to U.S. or Israel. Now more than ever, Congress must demonstrate its unwavering commitment to strengthening the U.S.-Israeli relations during such an unpredictable time in the Middle East. This is something that is needed. It is something for our friend Israel. It protects our interest and protects Israel's interest. And with that, I would urge support of H.R. 1992. And with that, I yield back my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. ROS-LEHTINEN, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2
Thank
minutes.
you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Chairman again for the time. And I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1992, the qualitative military edge for Israel, the Enhancement Act, authored by my colleague and the Vice Chair of our Subcommittee on Middle East and North Africa, Mr. Collins. There is no better time than now, Mr. Speaker, to pass this bill and send our closest friend and ally, the Democratic Jewish State of Israel, and the rest of the world, a strong message that the United States Congress stands resolutely with Israel and her right to defend herself. The U.S. and other world leaders lamentably acquiesced and relented on the Iran nuclear deal and offered concessions to the regime in Tehran that do nothing to dismantle its nuclear program. Even as the negotiations carried on, Iran was busy making advancement to its nuclear weapons program. Shortly after the deal, Iran announced that it had made significant progress on its ballistic missile program, and just this past weekend, Mr. Speaker, the regime announced that it was moving ahead with testing on more efficient and sophisticated centrifuges. There could be no mistake for these actions. They all add up to Iran continuing down its path of achieving full nuclear weapons program. And, Mr. Speaker, we have heard this rhetoric that's been coming out of Iran for years now. The regime does not recognize Israel's right to exist. It denies the Holocaust. It repeats its calls to wipe Israel off the map, and death to Israel is chanted throughout the country. Iran is an existential threat to Israel's very existence, and now more than ever, we need to make sure that Israel remains not just one step ahead of those who seek to do her harm, but light years ahead. In conclusion, there is no room for error as Iran inches closer and closer to having nuclear breakout capability. I urge all of my colleagues to support this bipartisan measure, expressing our strong support for Israel to have a qualitative military edge. I thank the Speaker, and I thank my chairman, as well as Mr. Collins, the author of the bill. Thank you, sir.
Gentlelady from Florida yields back her time. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom, a member of the Committee on Ways and Means.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman, for the time. I rise to congratulate my colleagues from Georgia and Illinois for their work on this matter. It is incredibly important, and as Ms. ROS-LEHTINEN mentioned a minute ago, the challenges that Israel is facing are incredibly significant. The challenges are moving very, very quickly, Mr. Speaker. There is a storm cloud that's brewing, and rather than waiting to recalibrate, this bill says, let's evaluate how Israel is doing in terms of a qualitative military advantage and edge more frequently. As we know, if Israel is strong in the Middle East, good things happen. If Israel is weak in the Middle East, good things don't happen. And we have an opportunity now for the House to stand with Israel, and it was mentioned before by Mr. Collins a minute ago. It's not just for Israel's sake, but it's clearly in the best interest of the United States. There's one democratic ally in the Middle East, and that's the state of Israel. It is incumbent upon us as a co-equal branch of government to encourage the administration to do the right thing, not just from Israel's point of view, but from the long-term strategic interest of the United States. I'm a co-sponsor of this legislation. I am pleased that it's being brought under the leadership of Chairman Royce and his committee to the House floor. I urge its passage, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. Gentleman from California.
Yes, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Judge Poe, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade.
Thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. All around Israel, things are in tremendous turmoil. To Israel's south, Egypt is experiencing its worst period of unrest in 50 years. There is no elected government, and there won't be until next year. The economy is on a ventilator in Egypt, and it's propped up only by billions of dollars of aid from the Gulf countries. The Muslim Brotherhood is openly fighting the interim government with armed mobs. Terrorists and vagabonds in the always lawless Sinai Peninsula are only encouraged by the weakened state of Cairo. To Israel's north, Syria has become the world's hotspot for terrorists. Terrorists like al-Qaeda and Hezbollah are streaming in with no end in sight. Out-of-town criminals have come into the country to reap havoc. To Israel's east, already fragile Jordan is being overrun with Syrian refugees and infiltrated by terrorists as well. A little further east, al-Qaeda is wreaking havoc in Iraq, and there's more violence there than at any point since 2008. And to the far east, mischief regime of the desert, Iran, is closer than ever to obtaining a nuclear weapon that can enable it to fulfill its threat to wipe Israel off the map. When I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 weeks ago, he was clear that Israel cannot accept Iran as a nuclear threshold power if Israel wants to continue to exist as a people. He called our interim deal with Iran the worst deal of the century. I agree with him. It seems that we not only gave away the farm, we gave away the mineral rights as well. We took off our best diplomatic tool, sanctions, off the table. The biggest problem with the deal was that it made a peaceful solution more unlikely. With all these threats surrounding it, we need to stand side by side, let the world know, our enemies and our friends, that we are allies of Israel. They are the U.S. strongest ally. Israel is the only democracy in the region and the only one that respects human rights. It is in their national security interest and our national security interest to ensure Israel can defend itself from the ever-changing military threats. The enemies they have in the neighborhood are enemies to us as well. I support H.R. 1992. The bill will make sure, too, that Israel's enemies do not gain a military advantage over the State of Israel. I urge its passage. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the United States has no more important relationship, not just in the region but in the world, than the strategic, unbreakable alliance with the democratic Jewish state of Israel. Israel's security is our security. Israel's security must not in any way be compromised. As has been noted here already, Israel lives in a most dangerous neighborhood. Her security is dependent on a clearly demonstrated, permanently sustained qualitative military edge. This bill, H.R. 1992, improves, enhances our relationship with Israel to guarantee her qualitative military edge in a very dangerous neighborhood. I strongly urge all of my colleagues to support H.R. 1992 and to protect Israel's security. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. In closing, let me again stress the importance of the relationship with our ally Israel, and let me thank Mr. Collins for his leadership in authoring this important measure, and thank Mr. Schneider. I'm a co-sponsor of this bill as well, and let me say we have many common threats, especially Iran's nuclear program. This measure, H.R. 1992, is a testament to the American people's enduring commitment to the security of Israel, and I hope to see it passed today. And, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.
From California yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1192, H.R. 1992 as amended? Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. On that, I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the House will stand in recess subject to call of the Chair.
The House finished. The House finishing up debate on a number of suspension bills. Votes on those bills coming up a little bit later. We'll have live coverage when the House resumes here on C-SPAN. The lead House and Senate budget negotiators, Paul Ryan and Patty Murray, unveiled a bipartisan agreement yesterday that sets out federal spending levels for the next 2 years. Under the terms of that deal, deficits are trimmed by $22 billion over 10 years. $63 billion in automatic spending cuts, known as sequester, are replaced